Ready? It's great to see you all out here on this beautiful day in Jamaica. Many thanks for getting here, and thanks to also to all the faculty. I think we probably have quite a few Professor Joseph students here. Thank you, Professor Josephs, Professor J.R.M. as well. Many of my students are here. It's great to see you. I think we're going to have a great event. I welcome all of our guests, and I'm just going to throw it to Professor J.R.M. To get us cracking and have a good one and engage some serious issues. It's all yours, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Who are you?
Yeah, take it.
Sorry about that. I apologize. I am Michael Namphy. I'm a professor in the English department, and I'm the director here at the African American Resource Center. And we call it the People's House, and we welcome you to the Resource Center, and thank you for the pull-up. So sometimes I assume everybody knows me, and it's not. Thank you, sister. I appreciate your hollering at me. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, because the next thing, thank you for calling that out, because the next thing I was going to say is thank you, Professor Namphy, for making the space available, for helping out with this, several different details. So thank you very much, and thanks to the AARC for being here. Thank you all for being here. I know for some New York students, I know this is finals, and you might have other things on your mind, or just trying to forget things that just happened the past few days. But I thank you for taking the time to learn and be a part of this, hopefully, actively or however you see fit. This is an exciting event. This is I think this is a fairly high concentration of scholars on Haiti and the Dominican Republic, higher concentration, one of the higher concentrations I've seen on a college campus outside of a conference in a long time. I mean, usually departments get like 1 or 2 people maybe, but to have all of these, count, at least, well over a handful here. So this is really exciting. So let me just say a couple of things, and then I'll turn it over to other people here. Here's what the event basically involves. So we're going to start this event promptly at Caribbean time of noon.
Noon plus. Noon plus.
12:15. So we're going to have a series of short presentations, 5 to 7 minutes-ish, talks and interventions that deal with Hispaniola, island of Haiti, and that Haiti and the Dominican Republic share, dealing perhaps with the sentencia from 2013, perhaps with other issues. Each person brings their own sort of expertise to this matter. Not just the scholars, but you all as audience members. Maybe you have family, friends, or you yourself may be from the island or have family from the island. And so you all bring something to this too. So that brings me to the second part. After we have these first brief presentations, then we're going to have a question, answer, and discussion period. At the same time, I invite you all, if you are so interested and inclined, Professor White, where are you?
He's coming.
He's coming, he was just here. He's going to be setting up space in his office so that if you are so interested, you can go to there, and we're going to have someone who will videotape your own testimonial, your own short little presentation about what you think you want to say as an expert in this matter as well. And you have it, and it's going to be in his office, and so if it's as impassioned or emotional you want, and you have a degree of privacy if that makes you feel more comfortable, but feel free to share here as well. So that's going to happen about maybe 12:45 to 1, somewhere in there. You can dip out and come back. It's going to be somewhat fluid. And just one other note administratively for my students, if any of you are here for your own enrichment, fabulous. If you're here for the extra credit, then you can either go to the video and that will count, or you write your paper and turn that in by tomorrow. Email it to me. Also. So now let me just say a little bit more about sort of the theory of the event. Expert witnessing involves telling what you know, like witnessing, based upon your expert knowledge. It involves legality, morality, subjectivity, and competence. So let me break this down apart a little bit. So we have the expert witness. So expert, in a legal sense, I've been a part of a couple of court cases, people seeking asylum, and so they called me to say, hey, can you tell me about what's going on? that might face this person if this person is sent back to Haiti or whatnot. So I've been called to be an expert witness. And that kind of got me thinking as an expert. But like I said at the beginning, we're all experts in our own experience in our own worlds, right? Then there's this part of witnessing. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Christian tradition of witnessing, and that certainly has value. We also have another kind of witnessing in post-trauma situations. For example, in the Sierra Leone, the post-conflict in Sierra Leone, there was a film particularly powerful called Fumble Talk, where they basically have this sort of conflict resolution. They bring people together, and people who were like family members who were in the communities where family members killed or raped each other were able to come together as a group and talk about this and witness, and it healed wounds. And so that really kind of got me thinking about how something like this can also kind of bring people together in a sort of witnessing in a post-traumatic or just a stressful situation, right? Then I think about witnessing from the social justice point of view. When we have Bell Hooks, who's in her book Talking Back, talks about, I write these words to bear witness to strength and power that emerges from sustained resistance, and the profound conviction that these forces can be healing, can protect us from dehumanization and despair. Or Michelle Alexander on the war on poor people and the new culture of poverty, talking about, and I think that's one of the reasons why many of us stay asleep, because we sense that if we really woke up to the full reality and opened ourselves to seeing and witnessing and being present for the unnecessary suffering that exists and that we're complicit with, that our life won't be as easy. And of course, Dr. Cornel West, who put it succinctly, to be human, you must bear witness to justice. So these are some of the theoretical concepts that have kind of informed my thinking about this event. Now, the practical formation of this event came about because of the groundswell of interest in Haiti and Dominican Republic, those sort of island issues in the island and global press, starting around 2013, since the sentencia that I'm sure several of us will touch on. And it also has to do with a conference that happened at Rutgers University, which is similar to this, where we had some of the same faces came and gave short presentations. And then I wanted to add my own little element to this to show like my desire to recognize marginalized knowledge throughout the world, and to say that knowledge is linked to power, and there's oftentimes some really important things that we can learn from each other that sometimes doesn't get present in lots of other fora. So my goals to kind of conclude is that this becomes a space for emotion and intellect and exchange and dialogue. My goal is to inform people who maybe had an incomplete understanding about some of the situations, historically or contemporarily, and to give space for discussing in a respectful manner, to create a connection between the scholarly community and the greater Jamaica community. I had the opportunity to go down through Queens Village and whatnot and talk with people and talk with some Haitians there and hand out flyers and say, hey, this is what we're doing, and speak with them. And they looked at me like, who are you? Pale face speaking Creole. And I said, yes, that is me, blonde. And they were very happy and very pleased. And then finally, this event, I hope, will allow us to recognize that in this tense, stressful moment on the island, and for people on the island, involving lives that are linked across hemispheres, that we can all learn from what each other has to say. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter. Who's going to be our first presenter? Do we have any immediate volunteers? I'm thinking maybe the historians.
Where's Edward?
He's here.
Did you want to go first?
Whatever you want.
Sure. Why don't you come on?
Can I log on?
Doctor. I'm sorry?
Can I log on first?
Please, please. We have Dr. Eduardo Paulino, who's at John Jay. In the meantime, while he's getting this ready, Eve, shall I make a little more? One of our other presenters here shortly, Eve Hayes de Kalaf, is involved with this Haiti support group, and she has brought just multiple copies of this. And I'll kind of pass this around so you can all look at that. Kind of talking about what's been happening in the UK and elsewhere regarding Haiti? And is it just the UK, or is
Well,
it?
we work to amplify the voices of Haitian civil society organisations.
Right.
So what we do is we publish current affairs and current events on Haiti, but through their voices and their perspectives about what's happening on the ground. So we're very critical of the NGO engagement in Haiti, and we're very much trying to give more voice to grassroots organisations and talk about issues that affect them.
And this is based out of the UK, though?
It's based in the UK. We've been around since '94.
Excellent.
I guess I could also make one more announcement. A few short days ago, we launched Mark Schuler's book. Dr. Mark Schuler has been very good to visit us every time he comes out with a new book, which is about every 3 weeks now. And he always makes a point to come and do it here, to do his first or one of his first book talks here. And if anybody's interested in this book, he said the title of the book is Humanitarian Aftershocks in Haiti, and it serves as the event that we did a couple days ago serves as a very nice double with this one, because the core of this book was created by 5 of Mark Schuler's former York students. They were York students at the time who went to Haiti, who he took with him to Haiti in the weeks after the earthquake, and this book is very much there, bearing witness to their experience there. They and all of the 4 of the sisters were here talking about their work on the book. It was a magnificent event. We were very grateful to them for coming. So this is a book that summarizes their experience. If anybody's interested in the book, Mark said he's happy to. It's $25, but he said the price is negotiable if he really wants you to read the book. So if anybody's interested, and $25 is too much, just let me know and we'll work something out. Okay. So I do have a couple of copies of the book if anybody would like. It's all yours.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing today?
Good.
How's everyone doing today?
All right.
Thank you.
Ale.
Ashe. Thank you, Kieran, your college, and the Senate for inviting us here for this great space to further the dialogue preferable to violence. So I have about 5 or 7 minutes, and so I just want to kind of touch upon one issue out of many, and perhaps in Q&A we can elaborate on that even more, right? So the first slide I have is diaspora, right? When we think about diaspora, what comes to mind, right? Diaspora, Greek word diasperein, or to scatter about, to disperse, right? And as a species, we're no stranger to diasporas, right? One of the earliest, written definitions or appearances of diaspora is in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 28:25, "Thou shalt be dispersion. It'll be a dispersion in all kingdoms of the earth," and is usually associated with the Jewish diaspora, right? And the word is still relevant to us today. And as we know, as a species, we began. Right before this diasporic movement, we began in Africa, right? And we migrated all over. So the human diaspora is evident throughout the world, even in Antarctica, where we have human settlements, right? More contemporaneously, post-1500s, you can see that the world has been populated not just by the European migration westward to the Americas, but also the Eastern Hemisphere, and this is the origins of the last 500 years of many migrations throughout the world, right? So enslaved Africans taken to the Americas, indentured servants from, let's say, India to the Caribbean, or as I saw with my own eye in Fiji, who are the sugarcane cutters. So diaspora is a very powerful word, right? And what I want to touch on in this few minutes this afternoon is the diaspora of this island called Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It is a geographic anomaly, right? There are a few places on Earth where two nations share an island, right? St. Martin in the Caribbean, more touristy. You have, right, Northern Ireland, Wales. You have East Timor and Indonesia. You have Cyprus, right? But in the Americas, this is really an anomaly, an outlier. Two sovereign nations, embassies and consulates throughout the world, that share one island. And this, as we know, is a result of the legacy of European colonialism and imperialism, right? The word diaspora is important, especially now, because today, when you think about Dominican-Haitian relations, one of the first things that comes to mind is this, the ruling in 168-13, in September 2013, the Constitutional Tribunal, which is like the Supreme Court of the DR, issued a ruling, 11-2 ruling. Two judges dissented, they happen to be women, where essentially, if you were born in the Dominican Republic and your parents were documented, and therefore you cannot prove that you had documents, you were not considered eligible for Dominican citizenship. And this impacted negatively and disproportionately the largest immigrant group, an ethnic group or diaspora in the Dominican Republic, which is Haitians, right? And we can talk about the technicalities, we can talk about what has resulted from this very discriminatory ruling, but I want you to focus on an interesting kind of consequences that emerges out of this, right? We talk about resistance, about activism, and I want you to think about, right? So what happens after 2013, there's a big international cause célèbre, from not just inside the Dominican Republic, from activists, but beyond. This was unequal, this is discriminatory, how can this be? Is it even racist? And one of the most interesting, and I think one of the stories that I think we should follow is the two diasporas. The first diaspora is what we can call the Haitian diaspora, or Dominicans of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic, who are at the vanguard of fighting for equal citizenship, for securing rights. These are second, these are third, these are fourth generation people who were born and raised in the Dominican Republic and who are Dominican and of Haitian descent. And they have been at the forefront of organizing. And two organizations in particular, there are several, but two that I think many of us work with closely, and forgive me if I forget others, it's not meant to be exhaustive, right, this list. But one of them is MUDA, founded by the late and friend of ours, Sonia Pierre, and also Reconocí. And these organizations, led mostly by Dominicans of Haitian descent and mostly by women, are the ones that are organizing in the Dominican Republic and protesting against the government and saying, you know, we all have rights, right? How can it be that I was born and raised here on your commercials, on your diet, on your culture, and somehow I can't be connected to the nation, right? And this also resonates throughout the world, right? Because there are many groups who are, as the United Nations had said, stateless groups, as we see here, right? So that's one group, right? And what they do is they protest in front of the electoral board, the Junta Central. They have shirts that says Reconocí, recognition, and they are out in front, and they are fearless. And this is one Dominican of Haitian descent, Rosa Iris, a good friend of ours from Reconocí. Another one is Ana Belique. And what's happening now, the diaspora is becoming more engaged, more empowered, and they are even running for office. And she, in this latest elections in Dominican Republic, not just presidential, but other lower political offices, she ran for what would be called controller, kind of a low-level political post in her part of Santo Domingo. And I just emailed her to see if she won or not. But regardless, she is what democracy is made of, right? Historically disenfranchised groups coming to the forefront and wanting, in the truest Enlightenment ideals, wanting to secure their rights, right? The second group that I want to talk about in the Q&A is the Dominican diaspora in the United States. And these are Americans, like me, many born and raised in the United States, but of Dominican parents who are trying to bear witness and trying to understand, where am I from? How do we get here? What the hell is that? What's Trujillo? What's Balaguer? What's Perejil? What is that? And trying to make sense of it. And so as we're trying to make sense of it and breaking down a romanticized notion of what it means to be Dominican, rice and beans, Dewey à Suspois, right? The flag, parade, it's becoming more critical of our past. And one of the things that we're doing is mobilizing here, not just with other groups like Black Lives Matter and being influenced by Black Lives Matter, but also connecting with the diaspora, the Haitian diaspora, or Dominicans of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic. And we are emailing each other, we're meeting each other, we're strategizing with each other, right? Which totally goes against the kind of like historic elite of Dominicans, Haitians, they never get along, right? And one of the most symbolic of these examples of resistance is this year's Dominican Day Parade. Anybody went to the Dominican Day Parade? Yes, it's every August. I usually don't go. I have 2 kids. It's crazy, but I also happen to be on the board of the Northern Manhattan Coalition for Immigrant Rights, which tries to secure citizenship for kind of green card holders in the United States. And our chair, our executive director, Angela Fernandez, is the president of the parade. And this is the parade. This is this past year, 15. And look who we have, the banner. We have no more deportations here or there. We are all Dominican, somos todos Dominicanos. We are all Dominican is one group that emerged after the sentencia in 2013, and that is at the forefront. They're comprised mostly of Dominicans in the United States, Americans of Dominican descent. And think about this. This is the Dominican Day Parade on 6th Avenue, 2015. And along with famous Dominican generals like Luperón and famous Afro-Dominicans like Mama Tingo, who was killed by a hacendado, you have Sonia Pierre, a Dominican of Haitian descent. So Americans of Dominican descent, many like me, we get the connection. Because remember, no deportations here or there. People forget, since the mid-1990s, more than 50,000 Dominicans have been deported from the United States to the Dominican Republic, right? So this is not theory for us in the diaspora, right? This is praxis. And many of us also grew up in poor working class immigrant communities. So here, right, as you're gonna see, we're the other. And I'm gonna end up here. Another group I think is important is the one I also co-founded, Border of Lights, which for the first time, the Dominican state should have done this, is to commemorate those Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent who were killed during the genocidal massacre in 1937. This year we're going back, we go back every October. This is gonna be our 5th year. And we use the internet to raise funds. So far, since 2012, we've raised over $20,000. And with that money, we support local organizations. We didn't go in parachuting, right, and say, this is what you need. We say, what do you need? Okay, boom. And we do it both on Dominican and Haitian side. Because part of one of our philosophies is that there's this ignored historic solidarity between both nations on the local level, but it gets erased because the elites on both sides, but especially the Dominican side, they're controlling the narrative, right? And that's what sticks, right? And lastly, we are very politically conscious, many of us in the United States, because, right, like Dominican doctor in Washington Heights, Rafael Antigua, said, we Dominicans are all Haitians here in the United States, right? We are the other, and not just the other, we also are, in many cases, the racial other, right? Because many of us are of African descent, right? And so the Black Lives Matter movement, we get that. Like, I grew up in the projects, I can tell you stories, right? So when it comes to the deportations and the treatment of Dominicans of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic, it is personal to us. And as we become more and more of a strong community, over 1 million in the United States, and we're not just the Secretary of Labor, who's Dominican, Tom Perez, but also people in the army like Luis Moreno, who was the youngest a Dominican soldier who was killed in Afghanistan 2004 at 19 from the South Bronx. We are making connections, and I think one of the ways to understand this is through the framework of diasporas, right? Human rights, and also, as Carey said, bearing witness. Thank you very much.
So I'll get a couple more chairs for the folks right there.
And in the meantime, we're going to have, speaking of diasporas and whatnot, we're going to have, and solidarity and whatnot, we're going to have a couple of York students here be a part of this presentation too. We have Rachelle Antoine, okay, and she's going to give us a song, and do you want to tell us a little bit about the song?
I will.
Okay, and with musical accompaniment as well. And Rachelle, I've been talking with her about a couple of different things throughout the semester and the year that I've been here, and was kind of put in contact with her with someone else, another York College student who's going to be talking, Cindy Arias, who's Dominican American. I'll let her explain how she identifies. And she's going to be giving a sort of her own personal take and expression. So without any further ado, Rachelle.
Okay, I'm a little bit shy. So this song is by Marion Werner. He's a musician in Haiti, and he talks a lot about the political issues that goes on in Haiti and so forth. So this one piece that he wrote is called Viejo. Maybe Cindy can help me pronounce it better. It's called Old. The first part of the story talks about Haitian who are in Dominican Republic. They work in a plantation, and it also talks about how they go back to Haiti and go back to Dominican Republic. Their family are left in Haiti. So he talks about it, and hopefully it's in Creole. So if you guys need more explanation about it, I'll help you guys. And I have Dixon on the piano. Fete
Cindy Arias, another York Color student, come and read something that she's written for this event as well. Be comfortable.
Okay, so I'm Cindy Arias. I'm a York College student, and first and foremost, I'd like to thank Professor Jerem for not brushing me aside and allowing me to talk and to say my piece. I'd like to thank Professor Namfi for allowing us to have this space. It's a safe space, and everyone's welcome. So, thank you. Okay, so. The word Española is such a mouthful. I say this because it just isn't a word that I use often, if at all. I know what it means. It's a word that refers to the island, you know, the Haiti and DR. Even the Dominican Republic is a mouthful. I guess both Española and the Dominican Republic are like that for a reason. They both contain a lot in them. The diversity of people and language, and then add transnational in front, and apparently you get something totally different, an exchange, a relationship. These two countries share an island, and yet they hardly know anything about each other. There's the stereotypes, and then there's the facts. We know more about the stereotypes than anything else, but to know that there are efforts being made in order to get us together and learn about and from each other is really nice. The inherent need to try and separate ourselves, distinguish from one another, and make this hierarchy, this already existing hierarchy. I guess it's kind of new to hear that there are efforts being made to talk about the well-being of both the island. It's just ingrained in my head to think of them as separate entities, forever divided. So I'm getting to a place in my life where I'm starting to think of myself as not just a Dominican American girl, but also as an Afro-Dominicana. This is relatively new. Don't ask me when it happened. I can't tell you when the discovery of my blackness began, but I can tell you it's evolving every day. And it's evolving because I'm becoming more aware of what's happening around me. I can tell you that the microaggressions within the Dominican community, like the backhanded compliments, and the subtle yet overt way of saying that my hair isn't adequate enough, these kinds of things change people. Sometimes it comes from family and friends, and other times it comes from the official stamping me into the country at Las Americas airport. She stared me down, and I stared right back at her. Well, to be fair, she was staring at my hair, and she was trying to place me. Imagine it. Here's this girl with an American passport, with the last name Arias, and she's traveling with this woman who claims to be her mother. Mind you, the mother is white, and she's a Dominican citizen. The girl is way too black and way too nappy-headed to be A, this girl's daughter, and B, full Dominican, whatever that means. But what does it mean? What does it mean to be Dominican? Does it mean being born on Dominican soil? Does it mean mastering the Spanish language? Does it mean having white or light skin? Does it mean that I have to like Romeo Santos? How about preferring raisins in my pastelitos? I really don't. If these are the conditions for what it means to be Dominican, I'm fucked. I don't meet any of these requirements, and FYI, there is no reason you should like eating beef or chicken with raisins. That's disgusting, guys. But I know that there are people who have all of this, and they are Dominican. They can assure you of that. But why not others? Why don't they qualify? What's so special about the rest of us that we don't count? Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to explore these questions more deeply. Ask yourselves, am I represented properly within my community? Is there a conversation that I need to have with someone in my life who just keeps dropping the ball on these issues? Like, it's okay to have these conversations, and it's spaces like these that allow conversations to come alive in the first place. So thank you, guys.
Thank you both for being here. Thank you so much. Before we get into more of the other scholars, it was suggested to me that I give a brief sort of explanation about some of the issues of moving populations across the island. So obviously this is, I could teach a course on it, perhaps. Professor White, I could perhaps teach a course on it.
You will. He just ran, you know he just ran.
but briefly speaking, you know, you saw the map and whatnot, but my research has been, my doctoral research was on Haitian migrants and moving to, or going to the Dominican Republic, specifically educational and labor migrants. Now, since the 20th century, early 20th, early 20th century, there have been, and even before in the 19th century, there have been populations from Haiti going over to what it was the Dominican Republic, and then the border kind of moved around, and so this hard border that we think of right now wasn't always so hard, and there were communities that were comfortable in both Spanish and Creole and blended families, and so this idea of like, you are Dominican, you are Haitian, wasn't always there in the 19th century, and even today. But then there's some other large movements of people that tended to be significant. So with the growth of the sugar industry, for example, in the Dominican Republic in the early 20th century, then you had a lot of West Indian migrants coming over, but also Haitian migrants started to get involved in the Dominican sugar industry. And there's been some good scholarship talking about by Amelia Hinson, talking about how this is actually states, the Dominican state and the Haitian state were actually collaborating together, even though there's this discourse of like, oh, we hate you, and Trujillo hates Haitians, and you know, dictatorships were like, oh, but at the same time, they were in cahoots and facilitating the movement of Haitians into the Dominican Republic in the sugar industry. And that went out throughout the 20th century. Then we also, you know, there are also little tiny whispers, and if, you know, looking at the archives, the Dominican National Archives, you know, I've looked at different migratory papers, and you can see there are also like elite Haitians going over into the Dominican Republic, and there is today a small group of elite Haitians that are in the Dominican Republic as well as like a sort of a middle class or a lower upper class, I don't know what you want to call it. But there's like Haitian university students. There's a large group and a growing number of Haitian university students in the Dominican Republic. You also have a small group of professionals. So, you know, people who work in graphics, teachers at universities, language schools, graphic designers that are in the Dominican Republic. Some of them graduated from universities and stayed on. Some of them came over specifically to work in the Dominican Republic. And then, of course, you have the kind of the change after the change in the Dominican economy in the late 90s, starting in the 70s, but certainly in the 90s and the 2000s, where you have more Haitians that are involved in construction, other sort of service industries, in the tourist industry, in the sex industry, in informal economy, in the urban areas, and it's shifted. A lot of this motion have shifted from, you know, Haiti to these agricultural areas to more of an urban area. That doesn't mean that there aren't Haitians and descendants, Dominican Haitians in the rural areas, but there's a new flow of people. And so that's kind of this larger shape of Haitian movement over there. But there's also, as Sam Martinez has talked about, there's peripheral, there are circular migrations, and so people come and go throughout the year over the course of lifetimes. And there also are Dominicans that go over to Haiti. So you have, for example, particularly after the earthquake, if you look at some of the great construction projects that were completed in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, we have
Chair right here.
also Estrella is a Dominican company that built a lot of things in Haiti after the earthquake since 2010. You also have had other Dominican business contacts in Haiti. There are also Dominicans in the sex industry in Haiti. There are also other Dominicans also in Haiti as well. It's not as well researched, but this is certainly, it's not to say that the border is really separating these people. So that's just to give a very brief, big picture about the movement of people. That's all right?
I think. Can
Great.
you say a quick word about the legislation, the 2013? Just, can you say it?
Oh.
I mean,
Well, there are going to be people that can say much better than I think.
Okay.
She's going to be able to. Someone else, people are going to talk about it much better. But basically, Ed, you talked a little bit about this. Professor Paulino, sorry, talked a lot about this, or a little bit has mentioned this sentencia that was the Supreme Court decision, and other people want to talk about it because it's a really, really major decision, a state policy that has severe implications for citizenship and implications for what is diaspora and all these other points. Other people are going to talk about that. So at this point, do you want to come talk about this intensive? Okay, great. Well, then we'll have Hayes de Kalaf is going to come and talk all about this. So, and she comes from the UK at the University of Aberdeen. She's a PhD candidate.
Candidate, yeah.
Yes, wonderful. And we're so, yay! We're so excited that she could be here. I've been talking with her for, I don't know, a couple of years, and now we finally get to meet face to face. So I'm really excited that she's here.
Okay, mine's a bit more boring than everyone else's, so bear with me, because I get excited by things like laws and administrative adjustments and all those kind of really boring, dull things. But I think they're really important to actually understand in the context of what is happening in the...
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Oh, Hayes de Kalaf, yeah. I haven't got slides, I'm afraid. But I think it's really important to understand in the context of what's happened in the Dominican Republic. I know that Dr. Paulino was saying that the sentencia stripped the descendants, the undocumented descendants of Haitian migrants of their citizenship. That's not strictly true, in the sense that it stripped people born to foreign and purportedly undocumented parents. So it's how the state is interpreting this word documentation, yeah? So many Haitian migrants who went to the Dominican Republic were given a feature. They were contracted by either by the Haitian state or the Dominican state or through different agreements, but they had documentation, and some even had cédulas, yeah? So it's how the state is interpreting retroactively this who is illegal and who is not. So that's a really important thing. So my work looks at a contemporary case that I think is of great significance in the Americas, namely the changes to law and administrative procedures that the Dominican authorities introduced to restrict access to and ultimately retract citizenship from children born to foreign and purportedly undocumented parents. The practice is culminated in the 2013 ruling that we talked about, but actually I think it helps if we think about these as a process. 2013 was not the beginning. Yeah, there was a series of changes to the law, administrative adaptations, different commands that were given to civil registry officials in how they received and gave out people's documentation. So I think it helps us much more if we think about this as a plan. It was a plan by Dominican government officials to chip away at access to birthright citizenship from people who had a jus soli automatic right to Dominican citizenship according to the Constitution. It was changed in 2010, but before 2010, people born in the Dominican Republic were, by all rights and purposes, supposed to be Dominican citizens. So the ruling then retroactively stripped tens of thousands of persons of Haitian descent born in the country since 1929 of their Dominican citizenship. 1929, that's over 80 years. This is a long time. So the decision effectively converted native-born citizens into illegal immigrants in their country of birth. So severe were the implications that the Institute for Statelessness and Inclusion called it the most egregious new violation of international human rights norms relating to nationality and statelessness that the world has witnessed in the 21st century. This is a big thing. So due to the international outcry and widespread condemnation, the ruling resulted in the introduction of a series of complex registration mechanisms to record all Dominicans living at home and overseas. So even though this was a decision that happened in the Dominican Republic, the subsequent registration mechanisms to decide how the state would classify citizens and who it would reject as non-citizens have also affected people living overseas, and I've been interviewing those people over the past few months. So the state will tell you that they do not exist, and they do. So although these measures appear drastic, before the Second World War, it was common for states to try and render insiders foreign. There were immigration processes, for example, that promoted a type of citizenship by design, allowing states to favour the arrival of desirable immigrants, so people who they wanted to kind of accept into the nation, while treating other native populations, such as blacks, poor, women, indigenous populations, as foreigners in the law. So we think of this, in recent years, our concept of them, how we think of what is foreign and what is a citizen, has really changed quite a lot. It's been transformed by
discourse on human rights and who has a right to a nationality, and also through the introduction of globalised immigration rules and more sophisticated population management systems. So within these processes, undocumented populations, previously considered informal, have come to be talked about as being illegal. I'm quoting Dijan over there, who's a great academic in London. And this is a change of real importance in the Americas, where the descendants of migrants are increasingly finding it difficult to have their legitimacy recognised and their citizenship rights recognised. So, for example, in the US, you have the famous anchor baby debate. What is happening? There are anti-immigration campaigners who are saying that we need to adapt the 14th Amendment because they don't want people born to illegal, and remember how illegal is being constructed, it's not always how we think it might be constructed, illegal immigrants, and the fact that they're saying that they don't want them to have automatic access to Dominican citizenship. And this is actually happening at the moment through bureaucratic changes, through the rejection of, for example, Mexican identity cards, through expired visas, misplaced documents. Civil registry officials are saying, making it more difficult for people to access American birth certificates. So this is something that's not just happening in the DR, we're seeing it in lots of other places. So in the Dominican Republic then, scholars have focused their studies, as Kieran has been talking about, on the Dominican-Haitian border or in areas with high migrant populations. But what I'm trying to do with my study is to move away from a focus on the foreign. I want to move away from talking about migrants. I want to move away from talking about Haitians from elsewhere, and I want to move towards a citizenship to talk about, a conversation to talk about citizenship, to talk about people who are from somewhere, and also to ask them how they identify and how they feel. So the one way I'm doing this is by looking at people already registered within the civil registry as Dominican citizens. So how have these people been treated by these different processes? Who has been made foreign by these processes and told that they are no longer Dominican? And who has also not been affected at all? Because I think that's a question we need to ask. Not just look at the populations who've been affected, who are really suffering by this, but also start asking, but why are there certain groups in the Dominican Republic that haven't been affected and that have actually had no problem whatsoever when they've tried to face bureaucrats and get their identity papers? I think that's a really crucial question that we need to start asking. So my study then includes interviews to examine how the state is registering the legal identity of its residents and to identify those who've been categorised and re-registered as foreigners, as aliens within these processes. So to reiterate then, I do not conceptualise this so much as an issue pertaining to Haitian-Dominican relations. Let me just explain myself. I think that many, although not all people caught up in these processes, self-identify as Dominicans. If you talk to Juliana de Gispierre, who was the lady that the whole sentence, 2013 sentence, was focused around, she'd never thought that she was Haitian. Her parents were Haitian, but she grew up in the Dominican Republic, and the battle that she had with the authorities, she had a birth certificate, was to try and get her Dominican ID card. So I think that sometimes it's very difficult when we talk about this issue, because basically I see this as a process that involves the state making people foreigners, turning people who were citizens, who had a birthright claim to Dominican nationality, being turned into something else, being told that they are the other. So the state's actions then have essentially weeded out people's foreign origins by tracing the national identity of their parents and grandparents. So my work then calls for a reframing of this issue, away from looking at it, as we talked about, this state-on-state problem, and rather examine how Dominican citizenship is being constructed and deconstructed, and essentially then we can ask really who is being made foreign by the state, and also hopefully get the voices of those who are being affected and not affected, because I think those are important as well, to kind of speak out more on this issue.
Great, thanks so much. I'm just going to say, y'all enjoying yourselves? Yeah, good. Okay. If for some reason you have to run for whatever reason, and if you want to give your own video testimonial, that is possible. We're all set up for that. We talked with our gentleman, Ron. Earsham is ready and able to take your video testimonial if you need to leave, but he'll be here until 3 o'clock, so you can wait for after and do that too. Next, what I want to do is, the next thing is we're going to have Dr. Mays, historian, come. She's from out of college. She's going to give a talk. Well, we'll see what she's going to talk about. But she is always very entertaining. So without any further ado, Professor Mays.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. You are part of a pre-conference from the section, the Haiti-Dominican Republic Section of the Latin American Studies Association, LASA, which begins its meeting tomorrow at the Hilton Midtown. And I would love for as many of you to come and color bomb LASA tomorrow. And I say that quite literally, okay? I'm sorry. You need a, okay. So, right. We were talking about safe spaces, right? We talk truth. Okay. So please come. Okay, after that I have to be all professional again. So anyway, again, my name is April Mays. I'm coming to you from not so sunny California at the moment. It's actually warmer here than it is outside of Los Angeles, if you can believe that. It's very cloudy and very gray and very cool, which is great because it's always a hot, hot summer. So it's great to be here. But do come to Latin American Studies. We have a number of panels and presentations that relate to Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and then the rest of Latin America. But for me, the center of the universe is Hispaniola. So what I want to talk about in the 5-ish minutes, since we're on Caribbean time, I want to talk actually about two things, two sort of related things, something I'll be talking about in a paper this week. One is why some of the changes that Eve was relating to, why are states manipulating the vulnerability of citizenships, of documentation. And that's what we have to think about too, that if the state can create citizens and uncreate citizens, the state is manipulating citizenship and making that category vulnerable. So why? Why in this particular moment are states interested in, okay, do not do this in a paper ever, vulnerabilizing, don't make a verb out of a noun, right? Why are states interested in this? The second thing I want to touch on then too is, given this, what does this process facilitate in terms of movement, something that Dr. Paulino was talking about, and I'm glad I want to stay with this slide for a moment. Because I think Dominican, and particularly Dominican Americans, have been really impatient about, well, gosh, why don't we just think of ourselves as, and then fill in the blank? But if we read the historical literature on diaspora information, and in particular Laura Putnam's recent work, Radical Moves, and Sarah Johnson's work, someone give me that title real quick, Sarah Johnson, Fear of French Negroes. When you look at the history, you'll understand, and something that Dr. Paulino alluded to earlier, diaspora isn't natural. To think of oneself in relationship to other groups of people or as part of a diaspora isn't an inherent formation. It's not naturally given. It's historically constructed. It comes out of sometimes political movements, and therefore it is a strategic identity, right? It is a strategic position, correct? And so sometimes I feel like as Dominican Americans, we get really frustrated and really anxious, like, why can't everyone think like, well, because I know I'm right? But why can't everyone get on board with thinking like this? Because Dominicans, and Haitians, by the way, are just in the process right now that British West Indian migrants and African Americans were in the early 20th century that helped create diasporic thinking that we now take for granted as Pan-Africanism and diaspora. Does that make sense? So what Laura Putnam writes about in Radical Moves are those early 20th century movements. And one of the forces that changed people's perception about how they related to the other was what? Immigration restriction, right? As soon as countries began to come down on, we are not going to let British West Indians into Panama anymore, into Honduras anymore, into the United States, and then once you get to the US, we're going to segregate you in Harlem, right? Those, when restrictions on mobility came about, people began then to organize in different ways. And part of that was organizing as diaspora, as seeing, because they were under the same kinds of threats, right? So we can trace back this kind of political strategy and this posture, this stance, to very specific historical events and structure. And what's structuring all of that in the early 20th century, but the growth of US empire in the Caribbean, right? The United States becomes an emerging world power in the early 20th century, and where it begins to flex its muscle is in the Caribbean. It occupies Haiti, occupies the Dominican Republic in the 100th year anniversary of US occupation of the Dominican Republic here in 1916, and last year we celebrated or commemorated the 100th anniversary of that in Haiti. That is not by accident. It is not coincidence, it's not accident that we have these diasporic formations at the same time we have US intervention in the Caribbean. That facilitates this process, right? So we all kind of get on the same page ideologically, in part because structures and larger processes in the early 20th century, immigration restriction, US imperialism in the Caribbean, structure relationships for us, force those kinds of unities. Well, that hasn't happened for Dominicans yet. Dominicans are at home. And here's one thing, here's another counterintuitive way to think about this. The Dominican state, for as much as we talk about progreso, right, entre comillas, like, oh my gosh, Dominican progress, we have a subway in Santo Domingo, pero no hay luz. Right? We got this, pero no hay eso, right? But where the state has actually been successful is conflating Dominican national identity with the state. Dominicans have an attachment to their state identity as a state. And we see this throughout Latin America. Again, this is not surprising. This is a pattern throughout Latin America. So it shouldn't be a surprise then that when you want to try to change Dominicans' identity or Dominicans' identification with the state, that's a very hard process. And it's not until you get them out of the state in a migratory sphere and in the context of a Black public sphere that is emerging thanks to these campaigns structured by what? Restrictions on immigration, right? Policing, racist policing in New York and other places, incarceration rates, that we can begin to think diasporically. Because, in fact, we are now all in the same boat, right? That is not naturally the case. These things have to be constructed. So just have patience, it's coming. Because we've been talking about it for a long time in the scholarship. Dominicans in the United States, they're going to change the way Dominicans think about race. They're going to change the way Dominicans think about Blackness. And everyone's like, hasn't happened yet. And then people get mad. Why can't they do this? Why can't they do that? It's like British West Indians didn't do it either until the early 20th century, in the sense that we talk about it. And that's when they were where? Where were British West Indians? Where was Claude McKay writing? Where did Marcus Garvey set up shop? UNIA. In Harlem, not in Kingston, right? Not in Barbados. In Harlem, right? It happened here. So there's something about this space. So let's go to the question then, why this is happening right now. And one of the things I've been arguing with myself and with others, but I think we all agreement, we have to think about neoliberalism. Neoliberal governance is not about democracy, and it is not about inclusion. What do I mean by neoliberal? Well, neoliberalism is this process that our countries have been involved with for the last 30 years, and you have seen it, right? It refers to things like privatization of public services. So when you can no longer go to a government office to get a public service, and now you have to go through some mediator like a nonprofit or a private corporation, that has been privatized, right? Think, for example, television in this country has essentially been privatized. When I was growing up, and I ain't that old, you could, because I lived in LA, you could still put an antenna on your television and get the 3 major television stations and PBS. Can you do that anymore? What do you have to get in order to get TV?
Basic cable.
You gotta get basic cable. Homeboy went to basic cable. He's like, I didn't talk about cable, I'll talk basic cable, right? Which means what? You have to Pay. When we had rabbit ears on our TVs, we weren't paying, but for the hanger that was on the rabbit ears to make sure we got the best reception, right? Because the airways belong to us. That has been privatized. If you pay a basic cable bill just to get the basic television, that's privatization, right? If you live in a situation where in order to get good drinking water, you have to pay for it, what does that mean? Water has been privatized. So neoliberalism is about privatization. In this country and elsewhere, it has been about deindustrialization, the movement of manufacturing jobs other places, right? It has been about de-investment. We talk about that in terms of, the government. Do you know what percentage the state of New York supports state institutions of higher education here? I don't know either. Anyone? I can tell you, though, across the United States, the proportion by which state governments pay for higher education has been declining since the 1980s. You, my friends, students, you are bearing more of the burden, the cost of public education in this country than 1 to 2 generations before you. That is privatization, right? Because now you have to come up with the funds. Back in the day, right, someone could go to UC Berkeley, where I don't live in Berkeley, but University of California, Berkeley, and literally pay $200 for fees. That's it, in-state tuition, in-state fees, right? Now you're paying much more. That's privatization. So deindustrialization, privatization of government services, the movement of manufacturing jobs elsewhere, this is what kind of comprises what we call neoliberalism. And neoliberal governance then requires, because now the state is moving out of the business of giving, it now becomes really highly interested in who's getting whatever it's got left. Got it? Because very interested in that question. And neoliberal governance then requires exclusionary practices, whether it's, here's ID laws in the United States, who can vote? In some states, you need multiple IDs to even get to, right, to vote in a regular election. So that is an exclusionary principle, right? That is, policing, supervising, but also, as Eve was talking about, restricting access to things like the ballot box. This is one of the requirements of neoliberal governance. This is how neoliberal states remain stable. And since the 1980s, in particular, the mid to late 1980s, the Dominican government has basically become a neoliberal state, and especially under the leadership of the present-day party in power, and who knows, maybe they will stay in power depending on the outcome of this election. Most recently, the political violence that's happening not only in the Dominican Republic, but also in Haiti. Isn't it, again, not coincidence that both states are in a political crisis right now, either, right? But the PLD, the Partido de Liberación Dominicana, that has been the party that has brought this neoliberal structure to the Dominican Republic and has been in power. And so again, part of what's happening here is discipline. It's disciplining the labor market. It is creating exclusion about who gets access to the remnants of the state, who has rights in the state. And the way you do that is you make documentation, you make citizenship vulnerable.
Can I just add to that really quickly?
Wait, hold on, because my time is running out. And Eve said it. This is the governance, right? These exclusionary regimes, these increasing exclusions, we see this all over the place. And that's why I'm making these connections. Voter ID laws in the United States, similar principles applying. We don't call it that. We don't think about it in terms of neoliberalism, et cetera. So where does this get us? Now that we know why this change is happening, I think it facilitates and makes possible particular kinds of social movements. And this is what's promising, exciting, and even if it's a lot of work. One is we can now do some really cool intersectional politics, right? We now have the ideological capacity. We now have the examples. We Dominicans, and the first slide that shows todos, todas, right? Somos Dominicanos. That speaks to an intersectional politic where we can analyze race and gender and class, right? And citizenship all at the same time to figure out why these exclusions are happening, who's being affected, and what the larger impacts are. So this is the moment, for me what's exciting and promising about this particular moment is that now we can do this intersectional work that a lot of us have been doing anyway and no one's been paying attention, but now people are gonna pay attention to it because they're gonna be able to listen. And now also in terms of the new politics, this is facilitating this transnational diasporic social political formations. right? We had it in the early 20th century, British West Indians and African Americans, coming to, and not even, and even before then, the late 19th century, Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Dominicans coming together to fight for the independence of Puerto Rico and Cuba, right? As a transnational diasporic political project. We are in that right now. We are in that possibility right now. And we're doing it, right? It's happening. So now we can, I think, re-engage this question of, okay, how is this going to translate into new identity formations? How is this going to translate into Dominican communities thinking of themselves in different ways? And I would just end with this: be as vocal as possible. I come from California, where for us the undocumented, documented issue is right. It's right here, everywhere. It's in my face every day. I have students who are undocumented, and they're mobilizing, and they're speaking out, and they're not afraid to speak out. And they're demanding resources from our institution. They're demanding change from us as faculty members, right? Not to just respond to their needs, but to know that this population exists and that they have a particular set of needs. And what's been amazing about documented movements is just how visible, after generations being told, don't tell anyone you're undocumented, keep that, on the DL because you don't want to get in jail. People are coming out and, really embracing this status as a DACA, so they have DACA, or undocumented student. And so, and I think that is also informing what's happening in terms of Dominican American politics in this country. And we can talk about Trump later, but the failure of immigration reform, the crisis of deportation in our communities, but it's pushing us into this new political sphere, and that's what gives me hope, right? And students are at the forefront. They are the vanguard in this country and elsewhere to highlight the exclusionary regimes in place, the exclusionary regimes that not only make them vulnerable, but also cut off their potential and possibilities. And so you have work to do, right? So do it. That's it. Okay.
Did you want to, we're good? Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Dr. Mays. I don't have a specific list of who's going next, so you don't know or you don't want to?
No, I'm fine.
Oh, Tess is fine.
Tess is going. Tess?
This is how we do.
Hey, you?
Did you want to get the word in?
No, he was going to say something.
No, it's fine.
Sure. So, hello everyone. Thank you. My name is Tess Kulstad Gonzalez. I am from the Dominican Republic, despite my name. My second last name Gonzalez, that was my mother. My father was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic and married a Dominicana, and he was from Wisconsin and didn't want to go back to the cold and stayed and grew up in the Dominican Republic. So therefore, my English, I grew up there and went to my undergrad, I did it there, and then I came here to the US and got my doctorate in anthropology. So I'm an anthropologist. Yeah. And I'm teaching anthropology currently at Grinnell College, which is in the middle of the cornfields in Iowa, 9,000 people. Oh, there are 2 Dominicans, maybe 3 Haitians. So I am so excited to be in a room where people love and care about who I am and my work, right? So I think that a lot of us that are here do this type of work because it's very personal. And for me, this is personal. I went into anthropology. I mean, my undergraduate's in business, for crying out loud, right? So, but I decided to go into anthropology because I wanted to do something for where I come from and the people my fellow Dominicans and my fellow Hispanioles, Haitians as well. So this is very personal, and so thank you for organizing this. So I'll tell you a little bit about my work. My dissertation work and my initial research focused on the Haitian earthquake in 2010. So I spent some time on the Haitian-Dominican border in Arias. So, and I was looking at how did the earthquake change family relationships and these informal adoption arrangements that were taking place on the Haitian-Dominican border. I don't know if you guys remember the scandal that erupted when these Americans were taking Haitian children and crossing them into the Dominican Republic. So I spent some time looking at what was happening with these, in particular with the children that were left orphaned or were displaced, whatever. So, and I worked with this particular community of earthquake displaced Haitians in Arias and learned a lot about their experiences, but above all, learned a lot about myself as a Dominican. So, and what Dominican means. So as a middle class Dominican that grew up in La Capital, I had very few opportunities to talk to Haitians. I would only see them when I was a child cutting cane on our way to the beach in Juan Dolio. I would see them. They were these dark, sweaty bodies that would look this big from our car. And they were I didn't have any friends that were Haitian. So during that particular trip, during my research, I realized we have more in common than I grew up thinking that we did. They have a lot of the same foods, the same customs, the same mannerisms. Oh my God, when I saw a Haitian do, like, sucking teeth, right? So I learned to speak Creole, and my whole idea about two countries divided by this border kind of completely changed, right? I'm not saying that there should be just one island. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's more that unifies us than what divides us. So it was a really deep transformational experience for me as a Dominican. And through that process, I started not only to learn about the experiences of these people, but about what it means to be Dominican, right? So I had to, through my work, find myself, find an opportunity to interact with these people that a lot of us Dominicans think are this exotic, evil other that we should exclude, right? So from an anthropological perspective, my work looks at disasters. So I consider myself an anthropologist of disasters. And the first thing that when we think about disasters, is that they're not events, rather they're processes. So in 2010, we had that earthquake that occurred, what was it, 4:53 p.m., something like that in Haiti. 5:43 in the Dominican Republic. I was in Santo Domingo when it happened. And it didn't start that moment, and it didn't end when the earth starts shaking. Rather, disasters start accumulating or being created years before the earth starts shaking, in the sense of historically created vulnerable people, right? So we have to think about neoliberalism within the context of earthquakes. So for example, had Haiti not gone through these neoliberal processes where the agricultural economy collapsed and everyone moved to Port-au-Prince in just a few decades, you have millions of people living in a city that was unplanned. We wouldn't have had 300,000 or whatever, 200,000, 300,000 deaths, right? So to think about the earthquake, we need to think about the time before, what was happening before, but we also need to think about what happens afterwards. So I am looking at the current crisis with Law 168.13 and 169.14 within the context that this is part of the earthquake. This is part of the earthquake aftermath. The earth stopped shaking, and it's been 6+ years, but we are still in the disaster phase. So one of the things that anthropologists of disaster have looked at is when disasters happen, suddenly there's this brotherhood that takes place. And we saw it here in New York with Hurricane Sandy. People were letting each other share, take showers, plug their cell phones in. So for this brief period of time, we see this brotherhood, a collapse of all social differences. Everyone starts sharing and everyone kind of becomes one. We saw that in the Dominican Republic and Haiti after the aftermath of the earthquake. Everyone was talking about nuestros hermanos haitianos, right? We became kin. We became family for this brief period of time. Now, what previous anthropologists of disaster have noticed is that brief period of brotherhood, this ideal kind of, there's this anthropologist of disaster, Oliver Smith, says, he calls this brotherhood of pain. We're all in pain, we're suffering, people are dying, but it's a brotherhood, and everybody remembers these moments as it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? When does that period end? When outsiders come in. And who are outsiders? NGOs, foreign governments, etc., etc., etc. So Mark Schuler, by the way, his work is really prominent in mine, says, he has this great quote, he says, people in Haiti, and others have said it too, he says, first came the earthquake, then came the disaster. And the disaster were all of the nonprofit work, that is, all the nonprofit organizations that came in and flooded Haiti. And all of this, in my work, I say, is not a Haitian phenomenon. It wasn't a Haitian earthquake. It was a Hispaniolan earthquake, because what happened in Haiti impacted the Dominican Republic too. The failures of NGOs after the earthquake, and I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the scandal with the Red Cross, all the money they collected, and how many houses did they build? 6. And the stories go on and on. And Mark Schuler, in this book, I'm not familiar with this book, but the previous one as well, talks a lot about the disaster capitalism that is taking place, and that has taken place. And Haiti is not better than it was before. Remember, that's what all of us were saying, help build Haiti back better. Now, what does this have to do with 168.13 and 169.14? What happened in Haiti when the earthquake took place? And of course, this diasporic movement, for example, is not just did not just take place after the earthquake. We had Haitians coming to the Dominican Republic. The failures of post-earthquake aid and NGOs in Haiti have forced more Haitians to come to the Dominican Republic. So to understand the current crisis of immigration in the Dominican Republic, we need to think of it within the context of the international community's failures in Haiti.
Mark called it killing with kindness.
Killing with kindness. So the mess of Haiti is spilling to the Dominican Republic as well. So I'm trying to rethink this whole issue within the context of this earthquake. Now, my current work right now it centers on a lot of kind of like what Dr. Paulino was talking about, these international human rights organizations talking about the 168.13 and 169.14 rulings, the ruling and the law, because the earthquake keeps coming up over and over again in the discourse surrounding these laws. We helped the Haitians so much after the earthquake. Nobody has done what Dominicans did for Haitians. And so the Dominicans feel like the world isn't recognizing what we did for Haitians, right? So the earthquake keeps coming up over and over again in the discourse surrounding 168.13. So I'm looking at, so what role has the earthquake, and is the earthquake playing in all of this discussion? The second question that I'm looking at is what role is the earthquake playing in the shaping of how we talk about what being Dominican and what being Haitian is. So there's a relationship and there's a connection, whether it's direct or not. Dominicans are talking about the earthquake and are connecting these ideas, right? So, you know, this is, I said that this was a very personal experience for me because when was Tulile killed? 2014. After the 168.13 ruling, I'm here in the United States, I read all of this, and I'm just freaking embarrassed. How the hell have we gone from brotherhood Haitians, our brothers, to hanging someone in a public park? What happened here? Why did we go from brotherhood to this? And what has happened to me is that when I'm in the Dominican Republic amongst family members, friends, colleagues, people I'm interviewing, I find myself having to become this person that decries 168.13 and says, listen, Dominicans of Haitian descent deserve, you're taking away their citizenship, and having to kind of condemn the ruling. When I'm here in the United States and I read and listen to all of the discourse surrounding this mess, I find myself having to defend the Dominican Republic because the way that a lot of these transnational human rights groups and a lot of the things I've participated in relating to this ruling decontextualize the problem. They don't talk about the role that United States has played in creating this cluster beep, right? It's only a Dominican problem. Nobody talks about the Haitian elites and the Haitian government that never gave and had a macuteo, a negocio business, giving out the passports that Haitians in the Dominican Republic needed to get their citizenship papers. So it seems to me like here I am having to say, wait a minute, the issue is not that simple. It's more complex. And I feel in many ways intimidated to say, wait a minute, it's not just about race. Wait a minute, there's more to this, it's more complex than this. So, wait a minute, when I'm looking at a lot of the human rights organization discourses, and I am offended when I read a hashtag that says, eso no se hace. Because eso no se hace is what parents say to their kids. And I'm not a freaking kid. Dominicans, we are not kids. I am offended when a group of women in the Dominican Republic, these NGO women that went to this International Women's Organization conference, stood up in front of the Dominican president with a sign that says, todos somos Haití, we are all Haitians. No, we're not. We are not all Haitians. You are not a Haitian because you have not suffered like Haitians do. Neither am I. I am a Dominican, and to have solidarity with Dominicans of Haitian descent, I don't have to admit that I'm Haitian. So it's been a very personal, difficult process for myself, and having to negotiate these three different places of who is Tess in the Dominican Republic, who is Tess here in the United States. So it's very complex, and it's really a fascinating process. And from a research point of view is, how are we talking about and constructing what being Dominican is, and what is being said and not said. So I'll expand a little bit more on Monday, my presentation. So I don't know what I've said.
Thank you, Dr. Kulstad. Okay, so we have, how many more people are thinking we could want? Oh, you already.
No,
four?
I think
Oh, I thought you were breaking. No, you already talked once. 1, 4.
Did you say Beth?
No.
I thought maybe no? Okay, 3? I'm volunteering you. Okay, 1, 2, 3, okay. So I'm gonna try and really limit it to the 5 to 7 that I originally envisioned, so that we can all kind of engage in this conversation a little bit more. So, any, meeny, miny, mo?
You go.
You go. No, I'm saying,
Actually,
it
would work.
Yeah.
All right.
First, compliment each other.
Dr. Chetty from St. John's?
Yeah.
So I teach up to Q30.
Oh,
I
yeah.
teach up the road. I rode my bike down here, which is kind of fun. A little too hot to do in the suit coat. So my name is Raj Chetty. I teach at St. John's University, as Karen mentioned. I'm in the English department. I teach Caribbean literature in different ways, and I specialize in the DR in a narrow way, around questions of race and blackness. So where Tess left off is sort of where I'm going to pick up. And last summer, for a couple summers, I had the privilege of teaching a class in the Dominican Republic through CIEE, the third, I don't know what they call it, the foreign exchange program. And the class is around baseball and sport and culture in the Dominican Republic, which for me is really important, even though I teach literature. Thinking about these issues of culture and how they intersect with race, and how we can talk about things in ways that perhaps don't get talked about in the popular sense. And I think in some way in the sense that Tess is referring to, the sort of popular perception of Dominicans here and abroad. And that hits on an important element of Dominican society, the Dominican elites and wider Dominican society, as having a very strong anti-Haitian, anti-black, what has been called negrophobic sensibility, but that in such an emphasis on that erases the other kinds of alternative voices that happen. And for me in particular, thinking about baseball players who are all predominantly dark-skinned Dominicans, and in the DR are black, like they are in the United States. Whereas there are Dominicans in the United States, Eduardo Paulino as an example, who is black here, but not black in the DR. If we think of black as a socio-political category, that means people who are oppressed by virtue of a color that's tied to their race and to their class. That sort of intersectionalism that April was talking about, Professor Hayes. April.
It's hard.
I can't. It's hard. So last summer, when for a lot of the international world, everything went down, right? 2013. What I preached about, your comment was, this was actually the culmination of a long number of years process, right? At least 10 years. And if you want to extend that historically all the way back to Trujillo, if you want to extend that all the way back to earlier moments, you could even extend it to centuries. But at the very least, it was like 2013, all of a sudden, the world awoke to a situation that had been being fought on the ground for a long time. And by a long time, I mean 10 years, 15 years. By these same activists that are now emerging into certain kinds of visibility. And so as a professor who's interested in what happens, how do these things become visible? My question is, why does 2013 begin interest? Why do we now start paying attention? And there are some good answers. I think now, because all of a sudden a whole bunch of people were potentially and actually stripped of citizenship that once had it. So then we pay attention. But that process had started before. And the stripping away of that citizenship had started before. So why didn't we, and I'm including myself when I say we, as a non-Dominican, non-Haitian, weirdly, not even non-Caribbean, like I sort of fake all sorts of things. Like I speak Spanish, and like, you're a Dominican. I'm like, no. Oh, then you must be Guyanese or Trini because you sort of look Indo and you sort of do Caribbean. Like, no, not that one either. I'm just fake. So all of those things for me is like, how come we weren't paying attention to these things before that plenty of Caribbean people, plenty of Haitian people, plenty of Dominican people were paying attention to, but didn't have a platform to which they could sort of ascend. Yeah? And one of the things I, sort of in my work, want to argue that I'm interested in is because it's not recognizable to us until it sounds a certain way. Until we can slap Black Lives Matter onto it, we can't see it. And this is not to denigrate Black Lives Matter. This is a powerful movement. And it makes sense. And in fact, it's kudos to the people on the ground in the DR who said, let's get on that bandwagon. Because then we get visibility. Then we get recognition. Then the international community is paying attention. And I think that's phenomenal. It's strategic and important. And as an academic, I'm like, but why does it take that? What are the conditions that make it so that we will only see it when it sounds like the kind of race struggle that we're familiar with here. Is it a Black Lives struggle? Absolutely. Is it the same? Nope. Nope. Because black in the DR is a particular, and this is why Gina, I'm gonna mess up her last name, Gina Ulysse, this phenomenal professor, Haitian-American. If you read her stuff, she's an anthropologist also, but does all sorts of creative stuff with her anthropology in ways that blows anthropology up in a really important way. In an article in Africa as a Country almost a year ago in June, she wrote a certain kind of black. So the hashtag or the slogan, a certain kind of Black Lives Matters, doesn't sound as good as Black Lives Matter. But really when we're talking about the DR and other spaces in the Caribbean, it is a certain kind of black that is being kept out. And often those are Haitians. Everywhere in the Caribbean. And more broadly. Right? And in the DR, the percentage is higher, way higher. But the phenomenon is Caribbean-wide. The phenomenon, the Dominican phenomenon of exclusion of a certain kind of Haitian. Right? Not middle class, not mulatto, but darker skinned Haitians. Dark skinned Haitians. And not just all dark skinned people. Because dark skinned Dominicans who aren't in the popular sensibility, which is all crappy, Haitian looking, are not affected by virtue of just being dark. There are dark skinned Dominicans who are crazy anti-Haitian. And they're elites. Dark, one in particular, Manuel Nunez, really xenophobic, super ideologically smart or astute or whatever you want to ascribe to him. Phenotypically black Dominican, who espouses some of the sort of most vitriolic anti-Haitian stuff that's out there. Right? It relies on earlier, lighter skinned generation. So, I've got 30 seconds more than I have. Okay, so what I was like, I'm going to do a preamble to my 5 minutes that will take 4.5 minutes. So the point I want to make is when I was in the Dominican Republic, just in January, I taught this class here at St. John's. It was on baseball, race, culture, and we had a month where we talked about Dominican race stuff and baseball players in particular, and what happens when black Dominican baseball players who are black there come and all of a sudden their blackness means something else when they're here, and they're trying to negotiate, okay, I was black there, but here I'm a different kind of black, and here all the people who weren't black there, all of a sudden are black like me, but they're not black like me because I'm poor and from Umbate or from deep in some kind of, yeah, some of them are Haitian descendants. But if they're superstars, guess what they become? Like that. Dominican. Miguel Angel Sano, twin superstar, is Miguel Angel Jean Sano is his real last name. And he said, and this is phenomenal, he said, out of respect to the Dominican Republic, I removed the Jean from my last name. I'm like, damn man, why do you feel like you had to do that? But it's a system that tells him to do that. It's a system. And he is one of the superstars rising in Dominican sports right now. He's black, and he's Dominican in the Dominican national imaginary, in spite of being very centrally a Dominican of recent Haitian origin. These contradictions are what are at the core of what I'm trying to explore. Who gets to move in those spaces of blackness in the DR? Who have historically moved? Right? Who gets to determine which Dominicans are black? And oftentimes, it's lighter-skinned Dominicans who are black in the US sense, but are not in the Dominican sense. They're not at the bottom, so to speak. And so these are why, when you go, and this is what was really powerful about your presentation, you said, my white Dominican mother, because you were using the Dominican sense of your mom. Here, she's not white, but there, es blanca. She's white. Right? And these negotiations are really undone, are really central to how we have to think about how do Black Lives Matter outside of here. What does it mean to just export a term or adapt it to specific and local context in ways that make it really rich? And I think that mutual reinforcement of how Black Lives Matter can become a term that is international and global so long as it isn't just black as defined here, but also how does that get changed when we take it to other places? That's stuff I'm interested in. I think I covered nothing but sense. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Chetty. Fake, was that the word you did?
Fake.
We're brethren of the fakeness.
Mira de si vámonos.
So thank you so much. Do we have the next producers? You two thumb wrestle over.
I'll be super brief. I just want to play up.
Dr. Werner, geographer.
Yes, I will. So my name is Marion Werner, and I come to you from SUNY Buffalo, from SUNY to CUNY this morning, and thanks a lot, Karen, for organizing and inviting me. I'm a geographer. There's another geographer in the room. What do geographers do in the Dominican Republic? Well, mostly they do a lot of physical geography, and I'm not going to talk today about rivers or sorry. I'm going to talk to you about uneven development very briefly. And what I just want to point out to, or mention very briefly, is when Kieran sent this invitation, I was trying to think, okay, I don't work on la sentencia or immigration, right? I work on historically how these two countries in the, let's call it the sort of neoliberal period, essentially from 1973 to the present globally, and on the island really in the 80s, how they've diverged so much in their development. I was going to show you, but I'll just do it with my arms. If you look at their GDP per capita, it looks like this,
Awesome.
okay?
Yes.
It looks like a GDP per capita which has grown 1% or less a year since 1968, where they had the same GDP per capita, and the Dominican Republic's GDP per capita, which is let's say the income of the country divided by the population, has grown 8-fold, okay, which is why it looks like this, right? Then also GDP per capita is a terrible measure because it doesn't tell you anything about distribution, and we know that growth has been extremely unequal, right? So that's not the best way to understand the problem. But what I want to say briefly here is how has that worked? And in part that's worked through a process that political economists like myself have talked about for a long time, uneven development. What does that mean? It means that the development of certain places is premised upon the underdevelopment of other places, okay? That doesn't mean that that process is fixed. So we've moved away from what I would call, my Marxist granddaddy's uneven development, right? We're not core periphery forever and ever, but uneven development is still with us, okay? No, we have not moved away from that. It's just that the scale of it has changed. And one thing that the neoliberal period has done is it has really deepened the differences amongst countries and regions in the global south. Okay, I'll use that term, but increasingly we have the kinds of divergences that we see in Haiti DR is probably one of the most extreme. But these are relatively new, and we've got to keep that in mind. Okay, at the moment of decolonization, broadly speaking, right, the sort of 1945 to the late 60s, when we have over 100 countries come into independence, their general level of wealth was quite similar. But since the 70s and the sort of collapse of that development project, what we've seen is incredible fragmentation. And this is one piece of it, this island, of that global process. How does it work? And I want to give you two examples of how it actually works on the island, and some of them have been alluded to. Essentially, Dominican capital has been, so we could talk about immigration. Let me back up one step. Take my time and tell me I got 2 minutes. Let me back up one step. When I read, so I've been reading the Raj, Dr. Chetty, sent me a whole list of articles, right? Because I was like, I gotta understand this immigration stuff. I've been reading it, but there's so little political economy in it, it's sad.
Yeah.
Because the only thing that people can come up to and say about this is, oh, Dominican capital, and in fact the Dominican state, which is actually the biggest kind of capital there is, the Dominican Republic, relies on undocumented Haitian workers and wants to keep them undocumented to keep their wages low. It's true, of course. But there's a lot more going on here. And part of what's going on that's really important is that Dominican capital has positioned itself, part of the way in which the Dominican Republic has become middle income is it's positioned itself as a contractor for global capital. Okay? As a contractor in the garment industry, as I studied, right? That's one example, right? Setting up the first trade zone on the border, right? With the full support of brands like The Gap and 3% financing, which you don't get anywhere on the island, for millions of dollars from the World Bank, okay? As a contractor, but also, as Kieran mentioned, as a contractor for development capital, right? So we have Estrella and a whole bunch of other many Cibaeño-based firms, Dominican firms, who have gotten the contracts to even before the earthquake, to construct Highway 1, and then to reconstruct a bunch of roads, to build the Northern University, etc. Right? They've gotten those contracts. It doesn't mean they're making the big bucks. Let's face it, the big bucks, this uneven development, gets made in the global north, gets made by U.S. capital, but they get a share. And that share is really significant for how capital is getting accumulated unevenly on the island. So talking about flows of people, one thing we see, just from a media report, so you said people have been doing much research on it, and somebody should, but Ruben Sillier, who's the ambassador, was quoted as saying that, before, when the earthquake hit, they could evacuate all the Dominicans in about 4 or 5 buses. But since the earthquake, he estimates about 10,000 Dominicans are in Haiti working as engineers, they're working as administrators, perfect. They're doing that work of the contractor, right? Essentially facilitating access for global capital to Haitian labor and Haitian nature, right? As we've seen with the growth of the mining industry after the earthquake, okay? So that's one way in which this relationship of uneven development is happening. So I think I want to point that out to basically say there's a bit of a paradox going on in the, let's say, popular discourse about immigration. You might assume that what's happening is a kind of closure of the border, an effort to kind of restrict the Dominican sort of state and Dominicanness and separate from Haiti, but of course it's exactly not what's happening. What's happening is that this whole citizenship and immigration issue is happening in the context of growing integration and this relationship of uneven development, which has been the basis upon which many particular sectors in the Dominican Republic, construction, agriculture, export zones, etc., have figured out how to keep accumulating in a context where really, we're in a kind of capitalist crisis where there's very little growth anywhere. So I just want to put a call out there that as much as political economy isn't sexy, it can be sexy. I guess. It's worth thinking through these things so that we can have, I think, a more sophisticated conversation about what's actually happening, not only in the sort of realm, one plane, we think of a complex structure, which is citizen migration, etc., but also, this question of capital and accumulation. So I'll end it there. Thanks very much.
Yes, next we have Dr. Mariñez, who's from Borough Manhattan Community College, Department of Modern Languages. And have the floor. Thanks so much.
Hello. My name is Sophie Mariñez, and I am Dominican and French, the daughter of a Dominican father who was exiled to France back in the 1960s. And when I was 7 years old, he decided, actually things changed in the Dominican Republic, so we could all go and live there, and that's how I grew up. And I learned to be Dominican. And by the way, my daughter's name is Tess.
Oh,
so.
wow.
So yeah, I know who Tess is in the Dominican Republic. So
she must be
what?
One of 3 Tesses, maybe. There are not a lot of Tesses there.
So I had to learn to become. I had to become Dominican. I had to learn how to roll my R's, Anyway, so I teach French at BMCC, and even though I started working on Haitian-Dominican relations when I was in graduate school, it wasn't until the sentencia happened that I decided that I had to do something about it, because I just couldn't stay without doing anything. It was just too outrageous and shameful. So this is one of the things I did, because I have many Haitian colleagues and students at BMCC. We started by creating a petition on avas.org calling the Dominican government to annul the sentencia. It reached over 1,000 signatures and helped spread the word internationally. Then I decided to travel to Haiti, because as so many other Dominicans, I had never been there. And how can anyone even begin to understand this matter if you haven't even put your feet in the country? And then I saw some colleagues and friends being accused of being anti-dominicanos and traidores a la patria. So I also wrote some poems in a series called Sentencia del Infierno. And so then I decided to just devote my scholarship on this matter. Then in a recent presentation at a conference here in New York a few weeks ago, a member of the audience asked a question about what should be the next step for us scholars, writers, artists, students, and all concerned citizens. I know this is a lost cause when it comes to trying to change the thinking of older people, this woman said. But the ones I am truly concerned about are our children, the young, because I see many of them reproducing this ideology, even here in the US, where they should know better than to adopt a racist and anti-immigrant position. So what can we do to change that, she asked. And that way she was also echoing the concerns of my colleague Dalit Willamo at BMCC, who teaches Dominican history to Dominican students who grew up here in the States, and their understanding of Dominican history comes from their Trujillista grandmothers. And she coined this amazing term called the Mangul philosophy. She has a great piece. I told her, you have to publish this, the Mangul philosophy, where everything is Mangul in their head, right? Duarte and Luperón and when that happened, and it's such a mess. And then when she teaches, they refute her, and she has such a hard time. And she has 4 sections of 30 kids at her every day. I tell her, you were a national hero in my book. And so that's what's really at stake now. We can spend a lot of time investigating the intricacies of Dominican national identity and anti-Haitian racism, but we need to start asking what can be done to help younger generations dismantle their prejudices. For one, there are many things that can be done, but one of them is by actually getting to know the person or thing that I imagine to be so negative. When we open up and get to know them, we rehumanize them in our imagination. In other words, in regards to Haitians, when we actually see them and talk to them and invite them into our lives, we start noticing that they're no longer los Haitianos, whatever that means, but mi amigo, mi vecino, my friend, my neighbor, people like us who have mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, children and grandchildren. People who like merengue and bachata like us, people who are as ingenious as we are when it comes to survival. Most Dominicans have been raised with this image of the cuco haitiano, which is that figure of un haitiano con un saquito para llevarse los niños. You know, a Haitian man wandering the streets with a bag to carry off children off and fry them alive to do voodoo. An image that's still used to this day by parents to scare children who misbehave. Well, like Tess said, or was it you, we're not children anymore. Okay, we're not children, and instead of that awful image that distorted our vision, we can now reach out and learn about Haiti's history and culture. We can read its literature, listen to its music, discover its arts, make friends with them, and if our budget allows, we can visit the country. Cross that border, which is more real in our minds than the actual geography of the island. Let's visit Haiti and learn from its monuments and historical sites about its people and its love of freedom, and how it was the first nation to abolish slavery and the only colony to defeat Napoleon. These are things that they don't know in their Mangul philosophy history. So let's learn, for instance, that if it weren't for the Haitian Revolution, the United States wouldn't be the country it is right now. Let's discover that Haitians too have had an awful history of US occupation, dictatorships, an oppressive elite that just exploits them and pushes them out to other countries in search of a better life, just like we Dominicans have been pushed out. Because our state, our elite, our upper middle class have made it so. So when we start seeing Haitians like we see other Latino and Latina brothers and sisters, then they'll become human again. And they won't be that cuco haitiano, and we will no longer be afraid. Because that is what these ideologies are about, fear-mongering, so that we think Haitians are our enemies, when we all know who the real enemy is. If you were going to hold a grudge against Haiti because they did the so-called degüellos de Moca, back in 1805 when the Dominican Republic did not even exist as a nation, then why not hold grudges against the United States for occupying the DR twice, from 1916 to 1924, and again in 1965? How many Dominicans were killed by then? And how about the political and economic damage the US have done to our country over the past century. A lot. The US are all over are all over us with their corporate interests and political interference, and yet we are all here. We live in the US, we marry US citizens, our children are born here. We know all about American culture. Does that make us anti-Dominicanos? No. Does that make us traidores a la patria? I don't think so. So opening up and reaching out to Haiti should no longer scare us. If anything, we might be surprised at finding out how much in common we have and how true brotherhood and sisterhood begin.
Thank you so much. We have one more presentation before we open it up, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Carey from Georgia State University.
I'm getting over a cold, and I'll try and talk as loudly as I can. I'm from Atlanta, but originally from New York, and I've been down in Atlanta for 18 years. I could regale you with how I became interested in Hispaniola, how we helped create the first Haiti-Dominican section in the Latin American Studies Association, the idea of creating synergies of positive reinforcement in the academic and policy worlds. But I think since it's the end of a long day, and because you've heard all this theory, I won't bore you with sociological constructivism or other such terms at the moment. What I'd rather do is tell you a little about some work I've been doing. For about 25 years, I've been doing asylum petitions as well as work on refugee resettlement around the world. Last night I had dinner with an Iranian who was beaten to death by the Revolutionary Guards and ended in prison, and the guy's permanently dislocated. He got resettled in this country. This past 4 months, I've worked on 5 cases in Hispaniola, all of them on the Haitian side, which immediately tells you something about the ability of, let's say, second-class citizens in the Dominican Republic to even have the mobility to come to the United States, so that you can begin a process where, oddly enough, you have to be illegal before you can become legalized. I've been down to Haiti 3 times this semester to work on these cases. They all involved political assassinations by the Martelly government, usually by his henchmen, usually with what we would call in the United States credible denial. You know, when Reagan didn't know about Iran-Contra, it's because they didn't tell him. He just went ahead and did it. William Casey, started killing various clerics in Lebanon. He didn't even bother to tell Reagan because he knew Reagan would agree if he was told, but if he doesn't know, then he can honestly say, I don't know anything about it, despite the fact that the law requires the president to approve have a finding to do these kinds of actions. In Atlanta, we have a 2% approval rate on asylum petitions. It's the lowest in the country. In the 9th Circuit in San Francisco, it's 68% approval. Here in New York, it's about 45% approval. I could tell you a lot about how the Department of Homeland Security works, its immigration processes, its Homeland Security processes, and the like. But let's just say that the Supreme Court somehow, for 200 years, has never had 4 votes to consider a constitutional question on any major immigration issue. You hear a lot about public law, constitutional questions. How is it that you can get 4 votes on almost anything, but you can't get a single one on immigration policy? That means all of these questions are effectively delegated to fiefdoms run by separate Department of Homeland Security offices, what used to be called what used to be called Immigration and Naturalization Services, and now is called Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. The 3 individuals that I just won asylum for with my team, asylum cases, all had 1 to 3 of their closest associates murdered by Martelly's people. And I had to go down and solve the murders. Now, this is interesting because, in effect, we can always win a case involving an enemy of the United States. So if someone's from North Korea, Iran, or Iraq, it's easy because these right-wing judges in a place like Atlanta or in the Carolinas or even in New York will always side with the permanent bureaucracies in the State Department, the CIA, which, on, let's say, 97 or 98% of the issues, it doesn't matter whether Trump or Hillary's president. Policy's going to change. Political scientists, incrementalism, standard operating procedures. It doesn't matter who's elected. Yes, on Iraq, Bush in 43, the younger led an invasion, and that changed a whole lot of things, including the presence of ISIS, the expansion of the bureaucracy. And that was a dramatic difference, and it's the most perhaps dramatic example. But I assure you, if Trump is elected or Hillary's elected, most of American government's going to be exactly the way it was before. Because it is run by the day-to-day bureaucracies. It's only when things get in the headlines. The equivalent here in New York is the mayor doesn't want any pediatric AIDS cases getting in the newspapers. If it is, then we got to do something about it. Otherwise, the policies on dealing with homeless children is whatever what used to be called HRA, Human Resources Administration. We still call it that. Okay, so whatever HRA is doing it has its various federal regulations. Jackson Marcienne, Mackenzie Jean-Baptiste, and France Joseph were the three individuals that we somehow got super right-wing judges to go along with it. The only way we did it was by videotaping close associates up above in these political organizations, usually in the opposition, to say that, you know, I am safe, or relatively safe, because I'm in the newspaper every day. But my chauffeur, my fixer, my delegates below me have no protection. And this is something that most immigration judges don't understand. It's, you know, in the newspaper you'll hear about a political figure. So people have to think twice about murdering a major opposition leader. And so these people work for major opposition leaders. They didn't even get in the Haitian press. If you go onto YouTube, you can see almost everything on Dominican television or Haitian television about the news. It's quite amazing. If I had any free time, I would spend my time perhaps looking at what the major media says in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, just so I know how people are affected by what's broadcast. But all of these assassinations that took place, none of them made the news at all. In fact, in one case, an opposition-oriented media station in Haiti filmed the protests for Mackenzie Jean-Baptiste's little organization in Tabar, which is the airport area that used to be fields only 25, 30 years ago, and now is a massive overdeveloped region with this fortress, the US Embassy, even more protected than practically any building in Manhattan, where you can't get any kind of help as a US citizen for almost anything, because if you're not a US employee, they don't talk to you. Quite a difference from even 25 or 30 years ago. And this videotape of their protest showed them speaking out against the corruption of the local mayors in Tabar in one of these three cases. This was a case of corruption that came about because Martelly, the president, didn't hold any elections for local office for 5 years, and so he appointed his cronies to every mayoral position in the entire country. The cronies then stole as much as they could through all the ways that people steal throughout the world: extortion, kickbacks, embezzlement, you name it. They did it. And that's the one thing that people in very poor countries go into politics for. You know, what is power for? The political cultures in most countries that don't have the rule of law, the government is not there to enforce the law. They rule by law instead of rule of law. And so there's no check on balance of what anyone does in power. And because there's no check and balance on any power, the incentives are to reproduce this process over and over again. And if you speak out against it, they use various means. First, they try to co-opt you by offering you bribes. Then they threaten your kids. They might kill your dog or your chickens first. If that doesn't work, they offer you a job, join us. If that doesn't work, then they start sending you death threats. And if that doesn't work, then they shoot one of your lower ranking people. And that usually gets the message across. Now, there are people willing to die, like this guy had dinner with last night, but you know, most people kind of want to live. And, you know, life is a bitch and then you die, but you know, it's still, there's always hope. We have human beings that try to help each other. There's bonding. Maybe you live for your children, or you live for your comrades, or you live for the ideals that you believe in, or you live because you want to emulate your parents or whatever they taught you. Whatever your reasons, people generally want to live. And so when they kill you, everyone's scared to death. And most people don't even have these obsessions that some of us academics and others have, about ideals in politics. What they want to do is survive. Survive for their friends, survive for their children, so they don't talk. So I tried to interview neighbors who talked about how the house was trashed. They were scared to death. These are very marginalized people. The only person who would talk were these very top people. And so in all three of these cases, that's what it took. Videotaped testimony, which technically is not admissible in court because administrative law is different, but similar to due process in normal courts. That is, in normal courts, you have all kinds of rules of evidence, and the government will say, well, we can't cross-examine the videotape, therefore we won't let you have it. But in administrative court, it's up to the judge. They have discretion on almost everything. In this particular case, the other check on the judges is an appeal to the Bureau of Immigration Appeals, BIA. And these judges hate to be overturned. And so if they ruled not to admit these videotaped interviews, then they would face our appeal to the Bureau of Immigration Appeals, and then they would be embarrassed among their peers. And so, amazingly enough, these judges that have always said, you're never going to get this through, we're not going to allow this to happen, I dare you to go to Haiti. So in my own expense, I went to Haiti and did these interviews, and that's what it took. So the sad story is that it's going to be 2% approval rating in about half the circuits in the United States, because what it takes is either an Iran, Iraq, or North Korea as a client, in which case they're ideologically predisposed to approve it, or we're not going to believe any document you provide us because we think it's a forgery, unless you go down to the country and get the original document. And by the way, in Haiti, to get the original document, you have to know the birth date of the victim, the birth dates of the parents and their full names, the ID number from the voter ID of the individual. Now, mind you, they've had 6 censuses that are not really censuses, but voter registrations in Haiti since 1987. I've been down to every single election. And almost every time, all the voters' lists were lost each time. And nobody has their cards. So the people themselves don't know their numbers. So I'm supposed to get the number. And by the way, since you're a Blanc, this will cost you if you want that document. So in other words, it's kind of like Jim Crow voting, trying to vote in the South before 1965. And all the jokes the satirical jokes about, what does this say in Chinese? And it says, this nigger's not going to vote today. That's the punchline. In other words, when they use the N-word in the South, what they were saying is, you don't have any rights. And when you try to present documents from a place like Haiti or the Dominican Republic, these judges who are predisposed to deny any asylum will just say, how do I know it's not a forgery? You have to prove the negative. These are people who run for their lives, living in the mountains, scared to death, with almost no contact, who suddenly get on a boat, come to the United States. They have as much chance as having the documents as someone from Syria or Lebanon, who actually, in the enlightened EU, despite all the recent retrenchments on refugee status, have at least a presumption that they probably have a well-founded fear of persecution because they're coming from a war. Haiti is the worst human rights record, I think, of any country in the world that's not been in a war. We were in a war, of course, of a sort in 1915 and 1934 in the 2 UN peacekeeping missions as a form of occupation, but it's not war in the sense that we prosaically know it. So what I'm suggesting is that these are the exceptions that prove the rule. The rule is that you're not going to come in this country so long as in the United States, as in almost every other country of the northern world. If we can't use you as marginalized labor and you're willing to keep your mouth shut, we're not going to legalize you so you have rights. It's very convenient for us to have you work for sub-market wages so long as we can intimidate you by saying we're going to call, what they now call ICE, they used to call INS. And if you want to come on that basis, that's fine, but we're not going to give you a green card, we're not going to give you upward mobility, because as Marion said earlier, the world needs underdeveloped regions of the world to develop with developed regions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Carey. Thank you all our witnesses. So at this point, I want to open it up to anyone else who would want to ask a question or follow up on something they heard.
Students first.
Of course, students first.
It's a common question.
Nice.
But
Are you going to take notes on that?
but the thing is that I've noticed when it comes to relations with the Dominican Republic and Haiti, between oftentimes people outside of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, outside of Hispaniola, they look into Hispaniola with a lens with an American lens of what race is. So like here in the United States, even the word black, like what does black mean? But here in the United States, if you're African American, it means you have at least one drop of African blood. But it's different in Latin America and it's different in other places. So that's my common question. It's a common question. Yeah. So it's unfair when people say things like boycott the Dominican Republic because they're being racist. And I guess it's racism. But then like even in the Dominican Republic, like what is race? And just my head. So yeah, that's that.
Kim, so does everyone understand? She mentioned the boycott. Does everyone conversing know what that's
like on
about?
social media, everyone's saying boycott the Dominican Republic, don't thingy. And then I realized, because they're deporting Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent. But then you realize that if you do boycott the Dominican Republic and you do hurt the Dominican economy, you're essentially hurting the people you want to protect. You're hurting the people who don't want to leave the Dominican Republic because they're Haitians or they're Haitians of Dominican descent. So it's so dumb. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
I just want to follow up because a lot of my questions or comments are in the same vein. I just use black, and so I think about how blackness functions globally, and so I'm thinking about when Andre 3000 wore that shirt that says "Around the world, dark people suffer. Why?" Right? So when I'm an American using blackness, I'm talking about a very specific thing because I am trapped in a system that only uses visual cues, right? And when we think about statelessness, right, I don't have a state to make claim to. So like when I think about blackness in Hispaniola, if that's okay if I use that term, the argument that I hear is about the claim to the state and the identity and not the visual cues that like the Americans are working off of. So when I say you're black, or if I'm trying to connect to you all about blackness, you being a dark-skinned Haitian or a dark-skinned Dominican, or even better, a light-skinned Dominican, right? So if I'm trying to connect to you about blackness, you're like, I'm not black. With things I've heard, I'm not black. Blackness is a color. I'm from a place, right? So I'm not from a place, right? I'm from America. I have no connection to a state that says you were born on this land and your people are from here. But that's also not what I'm talking about. So when we think about boycotting a state versus boycotting a people, right? What do these connections and these ties, when we think about words like immigration, migration? I just learned the word expat, so I'm really like over it. So like so when we talk about bodies and movement and connections to state, and then we talk about blackness as like another thing, I'll leave it there because I don't really know, and it's annoying.
Afro-Ecuadorian, look at the Afro-Honduran populations along the coast. So if we were to take those lessons from that literature and Afro-diasporic black feminist theory, put it on Hispaniola, then I think that gives us space, because I think you're right, blackness is a space. For me, blackness is also a position. In England in the 1980s, there was a black politics that included South Asian people. They were black, and what black meant was anti-colonial, right? What black meant was a critique of Margaret Thatcher and Thatcherism and an emerging global order, which was bringing neoliberalism to the United Kingdom, of which black political actors that included people from the Caribbean, people from Africa, and people from Asia, South, or Indians, Sri Lankans, who were black because black was this position against this emerging global order, and also spoke to police brutality and everything else. So blackness can be absolutely right, lots of things. And so we also have to be aware of African American history to know when blackness became certain things for African Americans as they negotiated their relationships internationally too. So your questions raised for me the larger issue, which was what's so brilliant about your question. Where are you grounded? Are you grounded in Latin American history, Latin American studies? Are you grounded in Afro-diasporic studies, grounded in Black feminist theory? Because that helps you see, right, the different possibilities. And so what we've been trying to do, I think, as a section in the discipline is to open, to expand. We've got to get grounded in different literatures because this is complex, to give us the tools for analysis.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, please.
I have a question, but I've been kind of worded, and I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I have a poll.
I'll be your voice box if need be.
Tell us who you are, too.
Yes.
Rose, a student here at New York. I wanted to know if, since everybody has different areas here, I wanted to know if you all believe that Haiti and Haitians are the way they are now because of Haitians, or is it because of those who have invaded Haiti, as in the U.S. one and the other?
So did you all hear her question? She basically, Rose is a student here, and her question, and please correct me if I get this wrong, is that she wanted to know, is the way things are in Haiti and the way that Haitians are, is it because of something within the country, within themselves, or is this having to do with external influences like the U.S. occupations, UN occupations? Is this
It's a mixture of all. Oh, and I just said it was a mixture of all of those things. Like the other thing, Mr. Schultz still is here. I think I commented that, we were talking about the UN's influence in Haiti and what was happening after the earthquake, but I also said that where does the blame go to, like, the government and stuff? Nobody ever talks about what the Haitian government is doing for their own people. They're letting the people suffer without anything. And I think it's from all those sides. You can't put the blame on just one person, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes.
Can I do something that's it's an academic does it, but I have to recommend one book. And the problem I think today in schools is we only too many people assign books from like only the last 5 years as if things weren't done before. And the book Michel Rolfe Trio, I recommend all his books, but State Against Nation as an explanation in part for Haiti is something, it's just a very profound analysis, historical analysis of how you got the emergence of a state that acts against the nation systematically. And so the nation being essentially the sort of the peasant class. And I just,
Yeah, he's smart. He was a Haitian anthropologist, historian. He did everything and passed away recently and was phenomenally important to what people do. Michel Rolfe Trio.
State Against Nation. He's written several other books as well.
Silence in the Past.
Silence
Also
in the
has
Past.
to be read.
Global Transformations.
And he wrote them in Creole. I mean, he did stuff.
His first book,
State Against Nation is
the Creole book. Right.
Creole. Typique pour les Histoire d'Haïti, which was in 1977, was actually written as an undergrad, if I'm not mistaken.
In other words, he was ridiculously smart.
And is being translated. And is being translated in English.
Nice. Now. Oh, awesome.
To come out.
And was republished in Creole just a couple of years ago.
Great.
So, and there's another version of it in French too. So there's the Creole, then there's the French, then there's the English, then there's the English of the Creole.
And
also in Spanish.
That's what I was gonna say. Is it coming in Spanish?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Unofficially, I can say it.
Are you translating?
Not me. Yes.
Good.
I really like what Marion was talking about thinking about basically capital and the role of capital as well, because in 2007 the World Bank actually began funding citizenship registrations in the Dominican Republic. So part of my research is looking how that money, $13 million plus I think it was 2 or 3 million from the Dominican government, was used as a project to document 600,000 undocumented Dominicans. But what they were actually doing was building up the infrastructure and helping facilitate the systematic exclusion of people that they didn't want to consider as Dominicans within that. So I think also understanding this is, as you were saying, kind of getting out of the kind of Haitian-Dominican kind of geography of the thing and looking at it as a much more kind of geopolitical project as well, and understanding how nations are now asking for, there's a globalized system that are asking for how people are being biometricized, how passports are now being run by private companies as well, and how that data is being managed and that is being kind of used basically. I think there's a much bigger thing I think that is happening here. And I just kind of wanted to bring that to light, to trace the money. Look how money's being spent, look how money's being funded. Those registrations were supported by a number of NGOs as well, who were purportedly supporting the documentation of people, but this is now culminated in the absolute opposite happening.
There's your political economy right there.
Always follow the money.
So we have a couple of more minutes before we have to break up. Do we have any other questions?
Break up.
Yes. Disperse, spread.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions?
Leave and keep fighting.
It's just a side thing. I have a friend, her name is Winnie, and she's teaching, she started doing from her own home, Creole, like a Creole Institute where she teaches Creole, half for like the diaspora and then half for just people who want to learn. But she's now has her program incorporated into NYU and to a couple of places at Queens Library if anybody is interested.
Nice.
I'd like to follow up with you about that later. Great.
Could you do a plug again for the briefing?
Of course.
Some more people came
Would
in.
you like to do
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
So, here's this wonderful briefing. Where they all?
Big stack of
somewhere. We have more over here. This is of the Haiti Support Group, which is based in the UK and is a coalition of different NGOs.
No, the opposite.
Coalition of people working. See, this is why I need you to do it.
Sorry, we just work to amplify the voices of civil society organisations based in Haiti. So we're very critical of the NGO engagement in the country. What we do is work very closely with grassroots groups and issues, contemporary issues. So we've published recent editions on the elections, we've written about cholera, we've written about the DR issue, we've written about mining, and it's basically asking people on the ground what is going on and what messages they want to get out there. So if you go on our website, you can download all our briefings. We've been around since 1994. So if you want to see kind of contemporary issues, that one you're showing is on tourism as well. The tourism is an industry and how that's being promoted as a neoliberal model rather than helping local populations and kind of investing in the local communities. So that's kind of what we do.
What is the website, please?
It's www.haitisupportgroup.org. So please support us, and I'll work on Twitter as well. Haiti SG, I think.
Anything else? Well, I believe we still have, if you all are wanting to say something on camera, we still have that set up over yonder. You can privately go over there and say something and record your own testimonial. You still have these if you'd like to take one. But thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you for saying something. Just one more closing moment is that we will have kind of a continuation of events that are before the Latin American Studies Association meetings start tomorrow formally, that start at 7 o'clock tonight.
Tonight, 7 o'clock at the Dominican Studies Institute.
City College.
City College. Uptown. Reception, open to the public.
There will be food.
Oh, there will be food. Well, a little bit. Don't come too hungry.